Welcome all to this presentation. Today I'm going to show you how to go from zero to analysis in 5 minutes using Power BI and the PHUSE Open Data Repository. So first of all, I want to thank Microsoft for all the support they are giving to PHUSE and specifically to me during this presentation. The agenda for my presentation is I'm going to give you an overview of the NIHPO platform. Then the second step is I'm going to explain how we enrich the data. And then we're going to have an overview of the PHUSE Open Data Repository with a list of all the initial data sets that are already loaded into the platform. And then I'm going to give you a live demo of how to use Power BI and the PHUSE Open Data Repository to go from zero to analysis in 5 minutes. We had Mohammed that opened this seminar with the observation that 80% of the process is getting the data prepared for analysis and visualization. What you're going to see today is that PHUSE is going to take care of that 80% of the process so that you can focus on the analysis and visualization part. That's the goal for today. And then I'm going to dive deep into the axis of search, how you can use the Open Data Repository, and I'm going to close with a list of available Power BI materials and additional resources to help you transition into this very powerful tool from Microsoft. Okay. The first step is to give you an overview of the platform that we have built. And our goal with this platform is to integrate open data from multiple agencies in the US and the EU to give you an entire, to give you a 360 degrees view of the drug life cycle, from the chemical compound, publications, the clinical trials, the regulatory approval, the adverse events, the vendor payments through open payments, Medicare reimbursements, and federal payments. Think of this platform as a single repository where you can see everything related to an approved drug or a medical device as well from beginning to end. So you don't have to spend this 80% of your time going to all these different websites to find the data. That's the first step. We take the data. The second step is we're integrating this data across agencies and even across countries by points of view. You can have the intellectual property view, you can see the research view, the chemical view, the reimbursement view, the payment view. The idea here is to create a layer above the raw data and then to put together the pieces that make sense for researchers like PHUSE members, regardless of where the data comes from. Again, think of this as an integration layer, and this is all open data. So the pieces are freely available, and the layer on top is what helps you make that analysis and that visualization step a lot faster and with less overhead. The third step is to enrich that open data. The good news is that open data is everywhere. The bad news is that it's not cleanly defined and it's not harmonized. For example, in the case of the FDA, the adverse events errors, it has 4 formats in the last 10, 15 years. The data changes often, and the other key element here is that the names are not harmonized. For example, Bayer can be spelled in a variety of ways. And then what we do is we curate a list of all of the correct names as well as the hundreds of variations as they appear in the adverse events reports or in any other open data document. So again, putting data together is one, creating a unifying layer is the second, and third is creating this harmonized name so that you can search across all this data regardless of what the source name is. It's again adding value and saving you time. What is up and running right now is the Open Data Repository. This is available to PHUSE members right now. This is running in Microsoft Azure with significant support from Microsoft. And think of this as a pipeline where we take care of the 80%. We take the open data sources, we do all the raw processing, It's all Enrich, and it's now hosted in Microsoft Azure. And then you can consume that data using your tool of choice. Could be SAS, Jupyter, Julia, R, Java, Power BI, anything that you're interested in, any particular tool you have now. So all of these 80% is built for you, and I'll show you that in a minute. These are some of the data sets that are already loaded in the repository. We have all of the EMA data, we have clinical trials from the EU, we have from Medicare in the US, all the NPI numbers, all of the provider utilization data, clinical trials. From the FDA, we have all the adverse events. We have drugs at FDA, the NDC, the Orange Book. From Health and Human Services, open payments, as well as some chemical ChemID data, MESH, PubMed. And also we have all the clinical trials from the WHO, as well as USA spending in all the federal spending in the US. This is loaded and ready to go right now. And here is where we bring all of this together to the PHUSE members. Our goal is to accelerate the discovery of solutions to challenges, to help you all to learn new tools such as Power BI by giving you best practices. We also want to help members to quickly launch collaborative research among you, so that you can use this data and then extend it for your own purposes. We want to make data analytics accessible to all user levels, whether you are comfortable with Excel, with SAS, with C, Java, Julia. And also very important for PHUSE, the members will not need any IT involvement. The idea, again, is you get access to the database through your tool of choice. We have some documentation ready, and then you just start analyzing, and you save that 80% legwork. That there's no value in doing that. Let me introduce this concept of the axis of search. When you look at this open data repository, think of this as a cube, a data cube with a couple 100 million records inside. What we are building is the ability for you to look into that data cube through different lenses or different axes. The first one is by drug name, meaning give me all the open data available on this drug name. The second axis, when you turn the cube, is by active ingredient. Give me all the data available on this active ingredient. The third one is by condition or disease, then by manufacturer, then by country, state, city, that's a geographical search, and then two interesting axes of search by healthcare provider, meaning what's going on with this healthcare provider. And then the final axis of search is by researcher, what's going on with this researcher. The impetus behind this concept of the axis of search is that there is a lot of data in the repository, and we need to make sure that you can conduct the kind of research that you want in the fastest way possible, especially now in these COVID times. So let me go into the details of what each axis means. For example, in the case of a drug name, you are able to see the entire regulatory pathway for a drug name. You can see all the adverse events, the Orange Book entries, all the Medicare reimbursements for that drug name, and all of the prescribers that have prescribed that drug under Medicare. And I want to emphasize, all of this is open data. There is no PHI here. These are sources from the US government and the European government. So the data is A, copyright free, and B, it comes from government sources, so we can assume certain level of accuracy. Okay, so there's no PHI. Now let me jump to the live demo on how can you conduct an analysis on a drug name across all these regulatory agencies. And let me share my screen. I want to share this. Sure. Awesome. Chris, can you just check that you can see my application? And this is Power BI.
So far, yeah.
Okay, excellent.
We can see the map and stuff.
Okay, perfect. So thank you. This is Power BI connecting with the PHUSE Open Data Repository, giving you a drug name view into this massive repository. And by the way, this Power BI application was built by the Microsoft team, and I want to thank them again. In this case, we are looking at a particular drug name called Abilify. And in this case, the first page that you see here gives you a summary on the drug. And there were 43 applications submitted, 603 adverse events have been reported against this drug. And this map here gives you all the Part D claims for this drug. And you can see the top 10 prescribers in every state for Medicare Part D for the drug name Abilify. So I want you to understand what's going on here. On the left side, you have data, a summary from FDA errors. On top, you have a summary from the regulatory documents filed with the FDA. And then in the bottom map, you have data from CMS, Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, prescriber info Part D. Okay, so you are looking in one place at multiple data sources across agencies. The idea behind this system is you can then, this is the quick overview, and then you can select and go into, for example, the application details. What is the regulatory pathway for this particular drug? And here you can see all of the filings for this particular drug, the date and the document ID and the type, as well as the URL that takes you to the FDA website where the PDF file is available. We also have the full text of every PDF file. It's available in the database as well. So here you can track the regulatory pathway for this drug. The next dashboard, the next panel, gives you an overview of all of the prescribing history of this drug based on Medicare Part D claims. And this is 5.47 billion with 6.71 million claims between 2013 and 17. And that's what Medicare has disclosed. And then the interesting part here is if you're conducting an analysis on a new compound or you're interested in looking at a new condition or a new disease, you can analyze the drugs that have been approved for that in that class and then see consumption patterns, prescription patterns. You can see, and this is something interesting that we discovered with the Microsoft team, is when you go to Oregon, and you look at the highest prescribers, there are a lot of nurse practitioners that prescribe this particular drug. I'm not involved in the pharma industry, so probably this is obvious to all of you, but I found this fascinating that there are so many nurse practitioners as the top prescribers in the state of Oregon, whereas if you go to Florida, you don't get as many nurse practitioners. Sorry, let me. So in Florida, you get a completely different perspective. It's mostly psychiatry and some general practice. So again, you can make your own conclusions. The power of Power BI is that it summarizes millions of records that are sitting in the database and presents this to you in a way that you can immediately see differences by area, difference by type of practice, and then the goal is to give you actionable information. Because there was an earlier statement, we're living in the era of the data gold rush. And I think that's partly true, but the real value that PHUSE wants to bring to the members is not just to give you the data, but to give you actionable knowledge that you can implement and apply to your day-to-day business. And that's what this the Power BI system is designed to give you. And then the next panel is we look at the adverse events filed against this drug with the FDA, and this is, again, ERS. We can select by the type of adverse event, and then we get the details, the individual details of every adverse event filed with the FDA. This is all available to you today in the PHUSE Open Data Repository. Okay, so as a recap, through Power BI, you can quickly build interfaces like this, where the 80% of the legwork is done for you already, and then you can just focus specifically on your area of interest. If you want to search for information on a different drug, you can modify this Power BI package very easily, and then you get the info on additional drugs, whatever you're interested in. Now, the other piece that's relevant to this conversation is that I am going to post this file. It's called a Power BI PBIX file. You will be able to download it and run it locally with your own Power BI desktop application. And my goal is in the next few weeks to build similar PBIX files for a multitude of drugs, so you can all download that package that's specific for that drug. My thinking process, and I will welcome your feedback, is that I want to build each of these PBIX files as sort of a Carfax for individual drugs, so that instead of dealing with the hundreds of millions of records of the PHUSE repository, you will only download a file that is pre-configured with dashboards and maps and charts for your specific drug or your specific condition or your specific compound, and then use that in your analysis. So this is another benefit of PHUSE membership, as Chris suggested after the break, that you can come to PHUSE and get instant access to powerful tools to make your life easier and to make you more productive in your job. That's what we want to do with this system. Okay, let me stop sharing. Let me go back to my presentation. Yeah, excellent. Now, I gave you the overview on the axis searching by drug name. The next step is, and this is the demo, again, thanks to Chris Hamill at Microsoft for building this demo. The next axis that we're building is by active ingredient. And this is that we're looking at every drug that is available in the US with the ingredient, the chemical compounds that make the drug, and then to analyze everything from the chemical structure to the drugs that use that compound, to the PubMed publications, to the clinical trials where that drug came from. So again, think of the trajectory of a pharmaceutical product. We're going to have a similar Power BI file for active ingredients that tracks everything that goes on with that drug. The next axis is going to be by condition or disease, looking at LOINC, MEDRAS, NOMED-CT. We're planning to build this system where you can also see everything that is related to a particular condition or a particular SNOMED code, and then the drugs that are approved for that condition, both in the EU as well as in the US. So again, keep in mind the idea of the cube. We're just rotating that cube in different directions. The next axis, and this is going to be interesting, is by manufacturer, looking at all of the drugs approved for every manufacturer, as well as all the open payments that that manufacturer has made to providers, USAID spending, all the federal payments to the manufacturer, all the clinical trials that that manufacturer is running, as well as all of the EPA and FDA listed facilities. So you will have in one view for every manufacturer in one Power BI file, the entire view of what's going on with this manufacturer from all of these different points of view. The next one, and this is going to take us a little bit longer, is to look at this data from a geographical perspective. What this means is that healthcare is very geography specific, meaning you and I, we go to a doctor at a specific location. But all of that is registered, meaning all of the facilities conducting clinical trials are listed. All of the facilities conducting clinical trials in the EU are also listed, down to the city and in many cases the zip code. And all of the Medicare providers in the US, we can get through the MPI their practice address as well as their office address. So the idea here is to create maps of the US by state and then zooming in, where you can see what's going on here. How many clinical trials are going on, how many providers are here, how many different activities are taking place from a geographical perspective. Almost in real time, because most of this data gets updated once a month or even more often. Okay, so this is going to be a very geography place-based view into the system. The next axis, and this may be a little bit out of scope for some of you, it's looking at each Medicare provider, looking at their full Medicare record, that's the MPI, plus all of the Medicare reimbursements that go to that provider. And again, this is all open data, plus the open payments that go into that provider, including payments, grants, and investments. The goal here is to have a view as to each of the Medicare providers, what's going on with them, what is their prescription history from a Medicare perspective, and also what's their involvement in clinical trials as investigators or in terms of grants and investments. That's going to be interesting to see what we can find out. And finally, the last axis that we're going to look at is by researcher. And this is becoming a little bit tricky because the name matching is not necessarily easy to do. I may need to do some NLP, as was shown earlier, or some machine learning. And the idea here is to connect PubMed publications with the PIs in the clinical trials, with the PIs and open payments. So the goal here is to give you a view of an individual PI. What's going on with that person? What else is there involved? What else are they involved in? Okay. Then these are some of the available Power BI materials. After this event, we are going to distribute a link where you can download the PBIX file that I showed you, and then you can run this in your own desktop as long as you have Power BI installed. Power BI desktop is free, by the way, so you can download it and install it. The goal is for you to see all of these pre-built dashboards and the local data that sits inside the PBIX file. You don't need to connect to any database. You don't need to make any database calls, and ports are blocked, and IT. It's all built into the PBIX file. Microsoft also has a lot of resources in terms of AI for health COVID data. And you can use some of the data that's in the Power BI PBIX file to start to run some machine learning algorithms and data mining on the data. So again, think of this package as a way to save you the 80% and focus on the analysis. Then what I want to do is, for the next few minutes, if I could, is get some questions and also feedback from the attendees, from the community. This platform is available to FUSE members. What I need your guidance on is what kind of support would you need to use this platform besides the PBIX file? What kind of documentation would you need to be able to make the transition from whatever tool you're using now to a tool like Power BI? Are these data sets good enough? Do you need any additional data sets? As long as they are open data, I can add them. In terms of intended use cases, these 7 axes of search that I mentioned earlier, this is what I think makes this data more useful, but again, I am not in the pharmaceutical industry. So I need to get from you new use cases. What kinds of questions do you have where this open data and Power BI can help answer those questions? So my plea to the audience is, what are your questions? Because I'm comfortable and confident that with the data and with a tool like Power BI, we can answer those questions, but we need the questions from the experts. And I'm also looking for test volunteers that want to help me test these PBIX packages as I build them for each of these 7 axes. Okay, makes sense? So again, help me understand from your perspective, what are the questions that you need answered in your industry, in your day-to-day activities? So we had several presentations in terms of using Julia, additional performance, making things faster. That's great. And we have the COVID situation here where we need to tap into new data, integrate that faster. And we have this enormous effort that goes into putting things together for your analysis. Again, my question to you is, what kind of use cases do you have where you can use this data and this tool? Okay, and Chris, that's, if there is any question, I'll be happy to answer.
Jose, there are a couple of questions from audience. If you are okay to take it now, I mean, you want to take the questions now or you want to demonstrate more?
Yeah, so one of the questions is, we use Power BI for visualization, our analytics, and have found that some of their visualization types have difficulty rendering large data sets. Have you find that you are unable to use certain types with these large open data sets? That's a good question. And I bring you back to the idea of creating a specific PBIX files for a very specific subset, again, Carfax. If you want to analyze all of the heirs data sets and you want to merge that with all of the FDA regulatory documents and you want to merge that with all the clinical trials, you will end up with a very heavy load, regardless of the application. My assumption is that you have a very specific question that you want to answer. And if you can articulate that question, then it's a lot easier to then shrink the data set that you really need to look into and then render that data set. So that's my suggestion, and that's what I am doing here. Zooming into what am I interested in? What's the question I'm asking? Instead of just, excuse me, going, I have all this data, let me just scroll through this data. That may not be the right approach. Does that make sense? Did I answer your question? Okay. Lisa? And the next question is, how easy to export the data as a CSV file? I think it is easy and it's possible from Power BI. You can export subsets of the data. So that's one. The other approach is you can get access to the PHUSE open data repository itself, and then you can download subsets of the repository in CSV or any other format that you want. In the PHUSE GitHub repository, and there is a subdirectory called PODR, PODR, and in there you can find sample Python code that will allow you to connect to the repository and to select specific subsets of the data. And then it's trivial to use pandas or something else to export as CSV. And Jeff, did I answer your question? And if anybody has any more questions, now let me take you back to the live. Are there, okay, sorry. Are there different views in Power BI? Is it possible if we have to create multiple active relationships in Power BI. That is a good question. Let me go back to Power BI, and then we can address that. And again, I have to say I am not a Power BI expert, but answering your question, if you look on the right side, there are several connections to multiple data sets, including from the FDA. And let me move this here. All right, here we go. Move this here. Okay. So if you see fields, I have multiple active connections here to multiple data sets from errors, from the Orange Book, from drugs at FDA, from adverse events. So yes, this PBIX file includes multiple connections to individual tables. And part of the work that Chris did was to subset those huge tables by selecting the drug name. And it's easy to change the drug name, and then you will reload the data and get the data for the new drug that you selected. So this is a very powerful tool that can easily help you perform the analytics and the visualization that you want. Saving, again, avoiding the 8% on the data prep. Did that answer your question, Sagar? Right. So then my next question then, again, back to the audience is, what would you need? If you like what you see here, you like the power of the data that's integrated already for you, and you like the power that Power BI can bring to you, what kind of questions would you need to get answers? And if you send me an email with the question, I can then include that in the new dashboards that I am building. Again, I'm asking for you to give me your feedback and from your needs, and then I can customize the Power BI application to better fit those needs in the pharma space. Okay, and this is my contact info. And Chris, that's all I have.
Jose, that was a great presentation. I think if people could be aware of your GitHub area, because you have a lot of information there, and in your presentation, how you showed how the data was related, right? So if people can see that, then they can, if they understand what's there, then they can start determining what are the use cases for the data. And also from a Power BI perspective, if you have a pro account, you get like 1 gigabyte worth of data in your PBIX file. If you have a premium account, it's bigger. So it's really important to be able to slice out from those huge data sources the smaller file size so that you can actually use it within your Power BI application. And Power BI also enables R codes, R scripts, and Python scripts within the application itself. So, and we actually for the PHUSE FDA challenge, we use Power BI, but we use Julia to kind of trim down the data. We use a lot of FAIRS data, and when you get to such big numbers, you're really pushing the edge of the processing with Power BI. And we also had it's just something to be aware of, you guys. We had a chi-square calculation in the DAX code. We developed it, and out so many significant digits out got all zeros because we're running a 32-bit version. So check to see which version of Power BI you have, and make sure that you have the 64-bit so that you can do these calculations on these big sample sizes.
Correct.
So,
and to Chris' point, if you can see my screen, this is the PHUSE repository in GitHub, and then just search for PODR, P-O-D-R, and here you will be able to see documentation, sample code, as well as use cases, and there is sample code in Python and Java, and I'm working on C# and others. You can also download some CDISC synthetic data that I am working on. And in terms of documentation, there is a document on how to configure Power BI to connect with the Open Data Repository. And it walks you through the steps, downloading the Power BI desktop, how to configure the data, selecting Postgres, connecting, and then you enter the username and password that I will provide you with. And with that, you are connected and you can start selecting from the tables. Yeah, so this is all available right now in the PHUSE PODR repository in GitHub.
It literally takes 5 minutes. Like I helped Jose, I tested this early on and he gave me the URL to link to. And really, it took probably about 3 minutes. I followed the directions, linked up, got into Power BI, linked to a data set, created just really quickly created a graph in just minutes. So 0 to analysis in 5 minutes is absolutely here today with this application.
Correct. Also, sorry, there's a question. Can you separately identify clinical trial observations versus data from clinical practice? That's a good question. There is no data from clinical practice in the Open Data Repository because, again, we don't deal with any PHI. And in terms of clinical trial observations, I don't know if clinicaltrials.gov has that information available. I don't think so. Some clinical trials and a growing number of clinical trials include the results when they file with clinicaltrials.gov, but I don't think they have observations. Not that I know of. But again, clinical practice data, there's none. We don't handle that. Good question. Thank you.